Welcome to the Campfire Curmudgeon podcast. My name is Nicholas Jones, and with me is
Heidi Schilling.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi, Nicholas. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about supernatural events that happen during
wartime.
Modern wartime.
Yep. So we're going to talk about a couple stories from World War I, World War II, and Vietnam War.
Yeah, this ain't no Iliad and Odyssey with gods intervening and stuff, but
I mean, maybe. So the first one that I want to talk about is one that's probably known to a few people. At least they know the main character of this story. You've heard of the Red Baron, right?
yes.
Do you know who he was? You want to give us a little bit of info?
German pizza guy?
Yeah, he's the German pizza guy. That's why when you go to the store, there's the Red Baron pizza. He delivered pizzas to all the troops and became a hero. We're lying to you. Who was he for realsies?
He was a German ace in World War
What's an ace?
A pilot that shoots down over 5 planes.
There you go.
He was a multiple ace. I think he had like 35 kills.
80.
80. Oof.
80 planes, I think it was, shot down. So some of those planes had multiple people in them.
Uh-huh.
Actually, it might have been 80 people total, because I remember reading something about how his numbers spiked when he hit like a larger plane.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he became well known as the Red Baron because of the fact that he painted one of his planes like a really bright red, kind of to specifically throw in people's faces, like he could be as big of and bright of a target as possible and still get away.
Like, hey, I'm King Shit from Fuck Mountain, and I came here to shoot you down. Yeah.
Okay. But this is something you may not know about him, is that there has been a claim...
That he was reborn as Snoopy?
No.
Is that where we were going with
That's
this?
not where we're going. Was Snoopy
Actually,
the Red Baron, or wasn't he trying to shoot down?
Snoopy was in a British Spitfire.
That's because I was like, if he was the Red Baron, that would be a little weird. That we were like,
it was the Kaiser's army. It was basically like any other imperial army of
that's true.
French or British.
And that's kind of why he is still celebrated. Even after he was eventually shot down, so he did eventually die in firefight when he was in his big red plane. And when he died, a lot of the soldiers, they came to pay respects, like soldiers on all sides.
Yeah.
And they said that if they had captured him alive, they all would have wanted to shake his hand. So it's kind of crazy because even though he killed many people that were probably their friends, the amount of skill that he had was so great that they just, all of the other plane pilots, like they were just in awe of him, and they all wanted to, kind of celebrate him. So one interesting fact, though, that came out later on, it's been contested, but there is talk that he actually shot down what he believed to be a UFO. And
interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. And that rumor came from a fellow pilot.
This is like within 10 to 15 years of the first plane ever flying.
Which is why it was so strange. So the name of the Red Baron is Baron Manfred von Richthofen.
Richthofen?
Yep.
Okay.
Don't make fun of me.
You're the German speaker.
I am not a German speaker. You've said that on 2 podcasts now. I can tell people the color of my cat in German. That is not being a German speaker.
Okay.
My name is German, and I study it poorly.
Okay.
That doesn't mean I'm a German speaker, Mr. Jones.
Okay.
Anyways, so there were rumors that he actually shot down what looked like a flying saucer. Witnesses claimed that 2 aliens actually ran out of this. So what they're reporting is that when he saw this strange craft, at first they thought maybe it was just like a US craft, so they shot at it and they realized there was something strange about the craft, so they thought maybe it was like something experimental, something new. When it crashed, 2 individuals, which I've never found any description of, it was just 2 individuals, they just like hopped out like real quick apparently, and they just took off running into like a wooded area. And at the time, they thought like, well, that's really weird, but I guess it was just like an American, fancy aircraft, something like that. It wasn't until years and years later that fellow German pilot Peter Weitzrich, he said that fighters flying with the Red Baron also saw this aircraft, and it looked like a saucer, but they said it looked like an upside down saucer. So what we see as like the typical UFO style saucer, it looked like that but upside down. And
yeah, but they're symmetrical, so can you tell it's upside down?
that's what they said. What do you mean? Like you've got the base with the little cockpit on top? The stereotypical doodle of an alien spacecraft.
Okay.
So they said it was upside down. So the flat part was on top, and the cockpit, as I punch the microphone, the cockpit part would be on the bottom. I don't know why I'm doing hand motions. I'm showing you this with my hands.
Really interesting for our listeners.
I'm going to do a video of me going, not like this, like this, not like this, like this. So stereotypical flipped upside down. And they were all scared because they hadn't seen anything like it, but the Baron wasn't scared. He immediately just opened fire, and it went down. They said it went down like a rock, so it just kind of went straight down. It was.
What if it was a weather balloon?
I don't think it would go down that hard. It was taking down like tree limbs with it. Peter Weitzrich said, "There's no doubt in my mind that the Baron shot down some kind of spacecraft from another planet, and those little guys who ran off into the woods were space aliens of some kind." So the reason that he thought that this was an alien spacecraft is we know later on in like the 50s, that's when the big UFO craze kind of happened. And that's when UFOs were everywhere, especially the stereotypical flying saucer shape. And that's apparently when Weitzrich decided that that's what he had seen. He said, oh, that's what we saw. But he didn't tell this story until like 80 years after this event happened. So after the shooting down of the plane, that's when he decided to come forward, and he chose to tell Weekly World News. Which, do you know anything about that publication?
They're a black and white tabloid that
yes.
did like Bat Boy and
yeah. So they're not always known for the most believable stories. So people thought it was kind of interesting that that's who he chose to come and tell, but he claimed that it was because he and the Baron reported it, wrote up a report to their superiors, told them about it, and they were told not to speak of it because they were like, well, we don't know what it was, don't talk about it to anybody. And, you know, that could be very, very well be true. If they saw something that looked like a really fancy aircraft, they could be like, well, don't talk about it. We don't want it to get around that the Americans have better aircraft than us. Like, that's not, you know, something new and fancy. We don't want to talk about that.
We're going to be fighting a Cold War soon.
Yeah, so that could very well be what it was, as simple as that. But it's just very interesting that, you know, what supposedly the witnesses saw looked like what we think of as a stereotypical flying saucer, as a UFO, because there was really no aircraft like that at the time. There was nothing that flew that would even be really close to anything like that. You know, I can't think of anything.
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know.
Helicopters weren't invented.
That's what I was going to say. Were they around in World War I?
No.
They were not? When did those come in?
Barely tail end of World War II
really?
in Korea.
That late?
Yes.
Wow, that surprises me. I actually thought that we were flying those much, much sooner. So that even leads more, you know, question as to what could it have been? What can you think of that looks like that?
A weather balloon.
Are there people in a weather balloon, though? How does that explain they saw people bail out of it?
I don't know.
We did have a lot of different dirigibles at that time, so, I mean, it could have been some sort of experimental blimp of some kind
right.
that they shot down. But I think it's kind of interesting to think that maybe it was some UFO activity checking out, you know, the war to see what was going on, and they got shot down.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. You can actually find more information on UK News, Yahoo. So if you want to go over to UK Yahoo, the news section, that's actually where you can read a whole article about it. It's not very long, but yeah, what do you think about that?
I think that, I don't know, it's like a new method of transportation and warfare happened. Like, it's like, hey, this technology is 13 years old. All right, cool. And then it's like, well, was the UFO lacking in capability and aerodynamics and like movement at this in 1918 as it was in like the 1950s with Roswell?
What do you mean, like lacking in?
Like, does alien technology mirror human technology, like in terms of flight capability? Like, was alien technology around the same, like, podunk, wrap paper around rods and pieces of wood?
I don't think it'd make it their space.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't think that's what they saw.
And so, if it was, how could it allow itself to be shot down if it can possess the?
Well, I did see something on a website that was all about UFO activity. They said that some UFOs, this is reported by ufologists, they say that some UFOs have an antenna, and this antenna allows them to have control of the vehicle, of the aircraft. It allows them to see what's happening, what's going on around them, I guess. It can, like, read, which way is up, which way the weather is blowing, take those kinds of readings, and that if that was damaged, they would have been forced to take a crash landing. It seems awfully strange that they've got an antenna sticking on the outside that can be whacked off and the whole ship is useless. That does seem a bit hard to believe, but I still think it's interesting to think of. They say that the UFO went down like a rock, but how do we know they didn't just land it quickly and jump out and run off?
Right.
Because their orders may have been, don't engage with the humans, do not let them notice you, and if they were like, oh, we're being shot at, we don't want to disappear really quick and have them see an aircraft display. We'll just land it real quick, and we'll run out. They're so busy. We'll wait till they go off fighting each other, and then we'll hop back in and take off. You never know. Or no.
Never know.
Have you heard of the vanishing battalion of World War II? World War I, excuse me.
No.
You haven't?
Not by that name.
Not by that name. So this is really interesting. This took place during World War I in the Gallipoli?
Gallipoli
campaign. I hate saying it so much. It just doesn't sound like it's a word. Gallipoli campaign.
It's a peninsula.
I know,
in
it
Turkey.
took place. This is where it took place. It took place on the Gallipoli Peninsula of the Ottoman Empire. So this particular campaign took place from April 25th, 1915, and the 9th of January of 1916. So the objective of this campaign, do you know what the objective was, Nicholas?
The British just threw every Australian they could at the Turks, and the Turks slaughtered them.
Basically, yeah. British and French forces were trying to do a naval and amphibious assault against the Turks. And they were trying to have control of the Strait of the Mediterranean, where the Black Sea is, that serves it's an essential route.
The Bosphorus Strait?
It's the
Dardanelles.
Sure, it's that one. It connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Black Sea.
Yes.
And at the time, it was an essential route for Russia. So they wanted control over that.
It still is, but yeah.
Yes. Well, at the time, they were their allies. So that was controlled by Turkey, which at the time was an ally of Germany.
Yes.
So clearly, we didn't want them to have control of that. The plan was to push through, forcibly claim the city of Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, and that's where the Ottoman Empire's capital was at the time. So we were going to do a takeover by amphibious means, water.
Basically frontal assault.
Basically, we were just going to try to, strong arm them out of it. So during this particular event, there was a whole battalion of soldiers that just disappeared. You're looking very skeptical at me.
I just remember the campaign ended in disaster for British forces because basically that's when Australia joined the army. They fought under the British command, and this is where hundreds of thousands of Australians died. This is why the campaign of Gallipoli is basically remembered very with a lot of pride and sorrow in Australia. It's because it's one of their most famous campaigns, and where they were used as a colony. And so I don't know if this was necessarily they disappeared or they were...
No, they disappeared. This regiment disappeared.
Thrown into the meat grinder.
The Norfolk Regiment, it was made up of 250 men. So it was 16 officers, and it was led by Sir Horace Proctor Buchamp. And it was...
Hello, my name is Horace Proctor Buchamp.
And they were set for the Gallipoli Peninsula, and they left from Liverpool on July 30th, 1915. And they left on the SS Aquitania, and they arrived in Suvia Bay in Gallipoli.
Say it like a Texan, say Aquitania.
I don't want to say it like that, though, because I'm not a Texan, and it's not a Texas word. So I'm not going to do that. So they were ordered to launch an offensive against Turkish positions holding the Anafarta Plain in order to clear them out. So they were going in ahead of some Allied forces to try to be the first ones in to kind of clear everything out. They were in poor physical conditions, though, by the time they got there due to the journey just being rigorous. There was just a lack of sleep, harsh, brutal, hot climate compared to where they were from. A lot of them were sick with dysentery, and just morale was low. And this was supposed to be carried out in broad daylight. They didn't have a lot of supplies, they were running low on water, they didn't have accurate maps, and they were against seasoned Turkish fighters.
Yes.
So they were kind
Who
of screwed.
Built in rugged defenses, and it was their own homeland.
Well, and they're holding that, so they know that that's going to be people are going to try to take that from them. They knew at least one of the forces was going to come in and try to take that.
Yes.
So I think they were ready for that. It wasn't something that was a surprise to them. And so when the men tried to advance, they didn't have reinforcements or anything. They were immediately met with machine gun fire, and a lot of them were just picked off one by one by snipers. The Norfolk Regiment bravely passed on into the maelstrom of blood and bullets. They pushed through. They actually did manage to push the Turkish enemy back towards the forest. And the forest was, at the time, it was on fire because of all of the artillery. The forest had just caught fire, so they were pushing them back towards the fire. And they continued to charge towards them. And that was the last anyone would ever see of them. So they never came back. They actually pushed the Turkish into the forest. They followed them into the forest. Then they disappeared. So at first, it was thought that maybe they had been captured by Turkish forces. Maybe they were held as prisoners of war or killed. So the British made inquiries to the Turkish government as to what had happened, and they denied having any knowledge of them. When the war was over, the British demanded that they return the soldiers. But again, the Turks adamantly denied it. They said, we don't have them. We don't know what you're talking about. They declared that they had never even heard of this regiment. So they wouldn't have taken anybody hostage, they're claiming, because they wouldn't, they would have recognized when you take a prisoner of war, you ask all sorts of questions. You would get their regiment. They're claiming they don't have any record of that. They don't have any record of any of it. So the War Graves Commission, they carried out searches for war dead on this battlefield, and they were met with mixed success at finding just any soldiers in general. They found some Commonwealth soldiers who had died. They found uncovered graves. They did find a Norfolk regimental cap badge, and they did find 180 bodies around a farmhouse in a wooded area, and that was near where some of the men had last been seen. The soldiers, or the bodies, were found to have soldier badges, so they identified them as members of the Norfolk, and one was even identified as a Lieutenant Colonel Bucamp himself. So they did find some of the soldiers. So they thought, okay, well, it's a closed case. The vanished battalion's not that scary. What happened was obviously they were killed. So they thought that the Turks just killed them. But then, in New Zealand, a World War I veteran named Frederick Reichard, he and two of his compatriots, they came forward and they said that they have a first-hand account of what actually happened.
Okay.
So what they said happened was that they had been sappers with the New Zealand Expeditionary Force, and they had been operating in that area near the Turkish position known as Hill 60. So this was really close to where the Norfolk Regiment had been waging war. So they were supposed to be very close. And they claimed they noticed between 6 and 8 odd grayish-brown loaf-shaped clouds hovering over the battlefield. So while this battle is going on, some really weird clouds are right over it. So they were all kind of taking notice of this, and they said that it was strange because there was really high winds, and the clouds weren't moving like clouds blow with the wind. These were just staying right over the battlefield.
I'm sorry, how do clouds work?
They blow with the wind.
Okay.
Do you know how clouds work, Nicholas? Do you want to tell us how clouds work?
I was going to ask you.
Oh, okay. Well, clouds work by going whoosh when it's windy, and they blow away. You're such a brat, and I don't know where my notes are. You messed me all up. They claimed that there were these clouds, and then under this was a larger cloud, and it was really dense, and it was actually touching the ground. And this was near where the Norfolk Regiment was approaching. And they said that the regiment marched directly into it.
Mm-hmm.
So they were marching right on into it, probably following the Turks into this cloud. They said that this was estimated to be around 800 feet in length and around 200 feet high. So very big, very massive. When the regiment disappeared into the cloud, Reichardt claimed that it had then slowly risen upwards. So they walk into this dense cloud and it just rises up with the other weird clouds that are up high with it. So it basically took the soldiers with it, is what they're saying. They're saying that they never came out the other side of it, and when it lifted, they weren't there anymore. They disappeared into the clouds. So this was first published in a New Zealand UFO magazine in 1965, and it was a little bit corroborated in 1966 when another New Zealand veteran of the campaign, Gerald Wild, he told Spaceview magazine that although he had not seen the disappearance directly, he had heard many rumors among the soldiers that the entire Norfolk Regiment had disappeared into a cloud, and it had been straddling the ground, and it was just a bizarre story that people had told about the vanishing battalion. A lot of UFO enthusiasts really latched onto this, and they claim that that was a UFO. That what happened was it was disguised or designed to look like a cloud, and they had walked into it, and something had happened to them, and that they had actually been killed by someone, UFO, like alien,
other
somebody.
Forces than
It wasn't the Turks, is what they're claiming, which would make sense considering the fact that the Turks are claiming to never have ever fought them or even taken them hostage. They don't know anything about them. So that's the claim of that one there. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. Also weird considering Churchill was an officer that was part of the Gallipoli campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. That's where that's why he had such a hard time ascending politically, is because the Gallipoli campaign was considered a British failure. But yeah, with this regiment that goes out and disappears literally into the mist, that's weird.
What's really weird is eventually 22 more witnesses from this New Zealand military group did come forward and say, yeah, we did witness it and we can't explain it. We did see them walk into a cloud. We did see the cloud rise up. They weren't there anymore. There was nowhere they could have gone, because what they were saying is it was too far away from the wooded area for them to have walked through in that amount of time. All of the men, they just walked into the cloud and boop, gone. Crazy. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that's crazy.
You think it's crazy? Do you believe it?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Probably not, but...
Probably not. What do you think happened?
I'm thinking like somebody fucked up, and then as a bureaucratic cover, they're like, yes, give them
that. That is a theory. That is one of the theories, is that they were like, sure, let's spread that rumor, because we don't want to admit that we made a real big fuck up thinking we could just charge it.
And we threw 225 men into a meat grinder unnecessarily. Yeah.
But the interesting thing was, for so long, no one did know what happened to them.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, before they went and actually searched and found the bodies, they had asked the Turks, and at this time, generally, after a war, what's considered sportsmanlike is to admit, to where bodies are so that they can be taken home and given a proper burial. Is generally you don't have anything to lose by that, because you're not going to have any negative repercussions from this. So they wouldn't have anything to lose by telling them.
No war crimes, even though all wars are crimes,
Well, and this was just during, they were defending their own territory. There's nothing that could have.
Right.
Like I said, there's no negative repercussions really, so it wouldn't benefit them in any way, but it is possible that they just didn't have record of it, because during war, how can records be kept accurately, really? There's going to be some things that fall through the cracks.
Yes.
And there's going to be some things that aren't reported. So it's of course possible that this was just, they were killed in battle and, they just didn't ever feel like telling us, or the Turks never actually fully documented that. Mm-hmm. But it's still a very interesting story nonetheless, to have eyewitnesses who have seen something strange that they can't identify, and to have seen the same thing. That's what's so strange about it.
That is strange. Are we going to go an entire episode of can we move on to World War II?
That's what I was just about to do.
Okay, what do you got?
You gonna tell me how to run this episode, Nicholas Jones?
No, you go.
You want to run the episode?
No, you're the one with the info for the most part.
I'm the one with the info. I don't know about that. I'm the one with a few facts rattling around in my broken brain.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about Unit 731. Do you know anything about this unit?
Unit 731?
Yeah. You know
No.
anything about them?
No.
Ooh, well, you're in for a treat. A very terrible treat if you search this.
I don't know. Would the members of Unit 231 find it a treat?
731?
731.
Well, you can go on Wikipedia and they have a lot of information about Unit 731. This story is from Ranker. It's about Japanese cannibal soldiers.
Ooh.
Yes. So during World War II, there was a unit. It was called Unit 731. It was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that undertook lethal human experimentation during World War II. Unit 731 participants of Japan attest that most of the victims they experimented on were Chinese, while a lesser percentage were Soviet, Mongolian, Korean, and other Allied POWs. The unit received generous support from the Japanese government up to the end of war in 1945. So we all know when we talk about Nazi criminals and some of the experiments that they did on Jews, what kinds of horrors have you heard?
Just Dr. Joseph Mengele.
Of course.
Yeah.
You hear the name Mengele, you hear all the horrifying things he did. Unit 731, some of the stuff that they did makes him seem like he was a kind old man.
Yes.
They were that bad. There was tales of, if you really want to know about it, there's actually last podcast on the left. I think they do a whole episode on Unit 731, and you can hear about some of the horrifying experimentations that they did, but a lot of it was reported as just being for cruelty's sake and not all necessarily being for any sort of scientific anything. Nothing was gained by it. It was just like, hey, let's see how much we can fuck up a person before they're dead kind of experimentation. And after World War II, same thing with Project Paperclip. A lot of these, instead of being, committed, instead of us convicting them of war crimes, the U.S. was like, how about you just give us all your research about, all your experiments you did, because it's kind of unethical for us to do it, but since you already mangled all these bodies and killed people, how about you just give us your research and we won't convict you of anything.
Yeah.
So
this data might be important later for manipulating people.
Yeah. So during this World War II, this unit was said to be eating captured prisoners of war. And it wasn't because they were starving. They were doing it because they could. Sometimes the prisoners were dead when the Japanese began to hack off their flesh, but sometimes they were still alive. So for cruelty's sake, they were just cutting up living people and eating them. And this isn't really necessarily paranormal, but it is something very creepy and disturbing and a spooky story.
This should have been a trigger warning. You know what I was going to talk about?
Our whole episode has a trigger warning.
I was going to talk about fucking Foo Fighters.
Oh, go for it. You want to take it a little lighter? You want to lighten things up?
Well,
getting too much for you?
When you think of Foo Fighters, what do you think of?
The band. That's not great.
Yeah, they're like a C+ band.
Okay. You're gonna
I like them.
alienate some people.
I've seen them twice live. I just they're nobody. I don't know if they're anybody's favorite band, right? Like my favorite band's Foo Fighters. Yeah, Dave Grohl rocks. He's cool, but
sure, there's somebody's favorite band.
Yeah, I don't know. But Foo Fighter was used by Allied aircraft pilots in World War II to describe various UFOs or mysterious phenomenon. It's seen in the skies of both European and Pacific theaters. Mm-hmm. Though it initially described a type of Foo Fighter, it became kind of adopted and everybody just started calling it that.
That was just their generic term for anything unidentified.
Right. Let's see. I mean, the U.S. military even impaneled a panel of experts and explored possible explanations. For instance, they were electrostatic phenomena, so similar to St. Elmo's fire, or electromagnetic phenomena, almost like aurora borealis around planes. or simply reflections of light from ice crystals. Because this is the first time we had massive amounts of air power flying at high altitude.
Yes.
With, you know, people in the planes they could see out of the planes, right? Like, it was basically like the B-17 would fly at high altitude, and their crew of like 9 guys, they'd have open windows and stuff, so it'd be freezing. So they'd be in parkas, and they'd suffer frostbite, and they'd be up at altitudes looking out of a plane with no window, no pressurization, so they'd be able to see whatever the naked eye could see without like reflections, so stuff that would really jump out at them.
Yeah, and there were lots of reports of strange aircraft that they couldn't identify. And if your job is to sit in an airplane and shoot at, enemy aircraft, you identify aircraft. You know who you're shooting at because you don't want to shoot at another ally. You don't want to shoot at one of your own aircraft that's in the airspace with you. You need to be able to identify who's a friend, who's an enemy, what each plane is.
Right.
And the fact that they saw a lot of planes that they couldn't identify is pretty intriguing. It's like, oh, what did they see? Was there a lot of people do think that there was a lot of UFO activity in both World War I and World War II around battle sites? They believe that there was a lot of maybe potential alien or otherworldly, other dimensional beings that were coming to see what we were doing and to maybe just observe, or even some individuals think that it's possible that they were sharing secrets with different governments. So they were perhaps watching and picking sides and giving different technologies to different governments at the time. Very interesting. We can talk about some more aircraft here. We'll talk about the disappearing crew of the L-8. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah, you sent it to me just a few minutes ago.
Before that, hadn't you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
Never? So this was another like blimp or dirigible, and this was in 1942. The outcome of the war was still in doubt. The United States was fearful that Japan would invade any of the western shores.
The amount of panic after December 7th, 1941. Everybody in like California and Washington and Oregon was freaking out.
Well, during in 1942 we didn't really know for sure that the U.S. was going to win. It was still very scary, and in February of 1942, an oil refinery was attacked in Santa Barbara, California, and a lot of people were afraid that this was not the last one, that this was one of many. So the military responded by sending out several large blimps, and these blimps were supposed to monitor enemy activity along the coastline. Just after 6 a.m. on August 16th of 1942, an L-8 blimp designated Flight 101 prepared for takeoff. The pilots were 27-year-old Lieutenant Ernest Cody and 32-year-old Ensign Charles Adams. Both were experienced pilots, but this was the first time that Adams had flown in a small blimp such as an L-8. So even though they're experienced pilots,
not a big blimp.
No, and they're experienced with all sorts of different aircraft, but he had not flown this particular one. He had never flown an L-8 before. Aviation machinist mate Riley Hill was assigned to accompany the men for the flight. Just before the departure, though, he was inexplicably told to leave the ship. Hill believes the heavy moisture was weighing the blimp down, making it unsafe for him to remain on board. So
that's how small it is. Think about a blimp.
Yes, so that's what he was thinking.
It can only hold 2 people. It's supposed to hold 3, and they're like, wait, too much weight.
They didn't say that, though, to him. So that's what he surmises. But he was just told you need to leave the ship. Cody and Adams left Treasure Island and planned to fly on a routine maneuver. Their intended flight path would take them across the Golden Gate Bridge, heading towards the Farallon Islands 20 miles off coast. And then from there, they were going to head north toward P.T. Ray's and then south along the coastline. So the first leg of this proceeded without incident, no problems. An hour and a half after takeoff, so at 7:38 a.m., Lieutenant Cody radioed squadron headquarters at Moffett Field, and he said that he was positioned 3 miles east of the Farallon Islands. 4 minutes later, he called again, and he said that he was investigating a suspicious oil slick. So he's seeing oil in the ocean, which could mean that a leaking vessel is nearby, something like a submarine
Yes.
could be leaking, so they were investigating this. And the crew, that this was the last time their crew was heard from. So no one on that L8 was ever heard from after that call. So they did not call in with their hourly position report. The personnel at Moffett Field, they became concerned. After 3 hours of radio silence, they received a message from San Francisco Shore Patrol. A blimp was